Hello everyone and welcome to CSCI 343 Fundamentals of Data Science. Today we're going to be talking about a broad range of topics in the area of learning and problem solving and machine learning and even a little bit of biology. It's going to be a fun day. Anyway, when we talk about this, I always like to take a moment and bring up my daughter. So man, being a parent is just like the most fun and weirdest, strangest thing I've ever done in my whole life. And one of the things I've realized is that, as we grow up, as we go through life, we often experience, well, the nature of being human from this first person perspective. We grow up, and the growing up is a first person experience. But now, with a little girl, she's at home and she's learning things and she's seeing a grand, complex, and confusing world around her, and she's figuring it out. And so for the first time, I'm seeing learning from the growing up perspective from an outside point of view, and it's really brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. So we have this little girl here growing and learning things, and she goes from being like something the size of a little ladybug into something that's much bigger that we just call ladybug because it's cute. They learn to crawl around and handle things and play and eat, and it's just amazing. And then eventually, before you know it, they're reading textbooks on holography. Now, granted, even though she is technically looking at a textbook on holography, she has no idea what this is. She just likes the shapes. But it was so cute watching her read through it, or rather, read through it. She's like telling me all about the triangles and the circles and, and all this, and it was great. But one of the things that, this kind of brings up is how do people learn stuff? I mean, you're advanced adults. I mean, you're smart. You're sitting here learning about all of this stuff. Like how the heck do you do it? How do you study for tests and pass them? How do you learn and build your assignments? Well, chances are you probably have some sort of strategies. Like you probably write your notes down, you read them, you repeat them, you look at the videos of your lectures. Some people like to take their notes and then transcribe them again to help reinforce their memory of those things. Some people like to watch visual examples and are very visual in their learning. Other people like to get hands-on, and mess around with stuff and build things in order to learn. Well, let's take it back a step. How does a small child learn things? They're somewhat less sophisticated than you, so they might not be transcribing their notes every day or something like that. And I doubt many of you are transcribing your notes every day, but really it is quite helpful. But they often learn by doing things and looking and watching other people do things. They learn by example. They do study. In elementary school, that's where you first get your introduction to studying for things. Your spelling test, your arithmetic test, those kind of things. And if we take it back a step farther, how does a toddler learn anything? Well, let me tell you, I've gone through this. Here's how a toddler learns things. They stumble around, they pick things up, they put it in their mouth, and they decide whether it is good or it is bad. Did I fall over and bump into something? Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? And they sort of meander around, just experiencing the world as it is. Did a good thing happen? Did a bad thing happen? If a bad thing happened, don't repeat that thing. If a good thing happened, repeat that thing. And so they're toddling around the world, learning about the complexity of nature with sort of this like warmer, colder kind of game. It's beautiful. But how does a newborn learn anything? Well, newborns come into the world almost a blank slate. They have very little experience. They know nothing of like the visual sense of the world. Everything they experience is a new form of learning. It's something they've never experienced before. Why do newborns cry like the world is ending? Because this is the worst thing and simultaneously the best thing that's ever happened to them. Every negative experience is at some point probably the worst thing they've ever had because they've been alive for like seconds. But here's the thing. Those newborns do come into the world knowing something. Actually, several things. And some of you might be well aware of this. One, they know how to make loud noises. They know how to cry to get attention. They know how to poop. They're very good at that. Very good. Immediately good at it. And they know how to feed. Now that's cool. Matter of fact, this is cooler than the other two. And I'll tell you why. Because, one, they know they need something. Like, they innately know this. And then, if you just get them close enough to their mommy, they know how to take it from there. They find what they need, and they know how to get food. And it's amazing. It's not just being hungry. There's motor skills involved. There's getting in position and getting in the right way and doing all the things necessary to get the food they need from their mother. And that's wild. It's mind-blowing that a child comes into the world knowing something that's actually, from like the performance and mechanics perspective, pretty darn complicated. So how the heck did that fetus figure it out? Well, that's a weird question, right? How does a fetus learn something? Well, one of the things that we often say in the class, or one of the feedback responses, rather, I often get in the class is, well, it's instinct, man. People got their instincts. Well, yeah, but where did those come from? It's still a thing. It's still a pattern. It's still like a method that this living thing has the instant they come into the world. Which then brings up questions like, how does a bug learn to fly, or a fish learn to swim, or how, like, a sunflower learn to turn and face the sun? All of these things exhibit, albeit primitive, but forms of intelligence. And that's really cool. I mean, some of these things are much more complicated than some of our very sophisticated, intelligent machines. For instance, horses come into the world, they can stand up and walk around like instantly, and it's fascinating. And the answer to that is, it is instinct, but it comes from a particular place. It comes from a memory, a knowledge that is stored deep within us. And that's in our genes. So, each of us has a set of instructions built into us. It's in every cell of our body that tells the cells how to function, it tells them how to split and differentiate, and it also includes some primitive information about how to perform some basic things that we need to survive. And so we can sort of think of this as a form of memory. And if we think on the species level, not on the individual level, if we think on the species level, there's really two kinds of memory. There's one memory that happens really, really, really fast. And by that, I mean over the span of an entire lifetime of one instance of the species, one individual within a species. And then there's long-term memory that's developed over the tenure of a whole species, that you're born with, that refines itself gradually over time. It happens very, very slowly over the lifetime, not of an individual, but of a species. And these things happen, well, the learning that happens over the course of a lifetime happens through observation and experience, and these things can be taught then to other members of the species. But the long-term memory of a species, those genetic changes, happens largely randomly. So some feature changes in the code of one individual that's then passed on to another. And if that random change improves their ability to survive or make more little instances of the species, children, then that trait gets passed on. If it's incompatible with life, and it results in an instance, an individual within the species that can't survive or can't reproduce well, then those traits usually don't get passed on, at least not as easily. And so traits that benefit the survivability of a species ends up being transferred and spread more rapidly than those that don't. And so in this way, we can sort of think of an individual within a species as being a trial run of the species. Like, I'm a trial run of human. I'm a unique set of genetic characteristics that never existed in the history of our species before, just like you are. And just like your dog is unique, and a unique instance of dog, or your cat is a unique instance of cat. There's never been an exact replica of those T, G, C's, and A's that resulted in your cat or your dog or you ever before. You're a unique instance of the solution that is human, the solution to survivability that is human. And so when a new instance of a species comes into existence, it's a new approach to surviving. And some of those are better suited for survivability, some of them are less suited for survivability. And these changes are tested against, well, the environment that the individual lives in. So ultimately, a species is trying to adapt to. Now, granted, this is a gross oversimplification for the purposes of explaining the top part of our topic today, which is genetic algorithms. So a good survivable solution results in more good survivable solutions that then are modified themselves, and ones that result in less ability to survive or reproduce are solutions that don't typically spread. Now, this can seem very confusing. How does a solution develop from randomness? I mean, this is crazy. We build all of our science and understanding and reasoning on the fact that, there's structure, and it's not random. We build on things. Well, really, that's what's happening here. And it's sort of like playing that game as a kid where someone covers their eyes and they're walking around a room trying to find something while someone else is saying, "You're getting warmer, you're getting warmer, you're getting colder as you're getting further away from it, and warmer as you're getting towards something." So it's sort of an unstructured search of a problem space, or a solution space, really. And so we can utilize a technique similar to this sort of genetic adaptation that we see in nature in computer science and data science, and we call it genetic algorithms. Now, this is just the most plain vanilla genetic algorithm explanation that there is. It's a whole research area unto itself, and it's vastly complicated. But a lot of it can be boiled down to this. So you come up with a problem that you need a solution to. And so you start with just any solution. Start somewhere and test that solution to see how well it performs. Chances are your first solution gonna perform pretty badly. And then you make a copy of that solution and make one random change and test it. And then you compare the results. Did the first solution, your parent solution, perform better than the child solution? If the child solution performed better than the parent solution, you replace the parent solution with the child solution. And that becomes the new parent solution. Otherwise, you keep the parent solution, make another random change, and rinse and repeat. So essentially, you make a random change to a solution, you test its outcome. If it resulted in better performance, or better outcomes of whatever metric you're using, then that becomes the new parent solution. Then you make a child solution with a random change and test them against each other, and you continue this process over and over, discarding the solutions that don't perform as well. And then eventually you converge on a solution that is an approximately good solution for the problem that you're trying to solve. And this is the basics of how genetic algorithms work. Now, there's other versions of this, other variants that are more complicated, but this is the basic vanilla genetic algorithm. And like I mentioned before, it's sort of like an unstructured search. You're testing a solution, you're finding a direction, and you're going that way and getting some basic feedback. And the basic feedback is this direction better or worse than the direction I was taking? If it was better, you keep moving in that direction. If it was worse, you turn a different direction and say, okay, am I getting closer to a solution or am I getting further from a solution? And you rinse and repeat over and over until eventually you converge to the solution that you're looking for. And it's a way of finding maybe not an ideal solution, but an approximately ideal solution to an ambiguous problem. It's kind of cool. So if you start with a random solution, doesn't that mean you'll always get if you start with a random starting solution, a random parent solution, does that mean you'll always end up with a different ending solution, that you converge to a different solution to the overall problem? And Yeah, that's right. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a slightly different version of a solution is going to perform a whole lot less worse or a whole lot more better than one where you started at a different point. For instance, take these guys here. They actually live in somewhat similar environments. And, you can sort of think of the mouse as being a furry mammalian lizard. Similarly, you can think of the lizard as sort of being like a scaly reptilian mouse. They have a lot of similar characteristics. These guys grow to similar sizes. They live in similar environments. You can see, they've got similar appendages. That they actually look fairly similar, and that's not by coincidence. They live in similar environments, so they developed similar characteristics to solve the problem of surviving in a particular environment. And there's examples of this all over nature. This is one of my favorite examples here. This is at the top we have what's called an ichthyosaur, and at the bottom we have a dolphin. Both of these guys have certain characteristics, and they look certain characteristics in common, and they actually look very, very similar. And that's because they developed in similar ways. They both developed from terrestrial animals, things that had hands and fingers, or well, we'll call them hands, fingery footy kind of things, kind of like we do. And we can see vestiges of that in their skeleton. So we see little digits inside of their flippers, front and back, and same in the dolphins. These guys both came from terrestrial creatures that slowly adapted over time to living in progressively wetter and wetter environments. And so even though they're not related to each other, they ended up converging on similar body shapes and similar characteristics because they were trying to solve the problem of surviving in similar environments. Now this is really cool. This is actually one of my favorite examples here. On this screen we have woodlouse and a pillbug, and which of these guys is which, I don't know. I cannot look at this and tell you the difference, and that's sort of the point. These two creatures are extremely far removed on the phylogenetic tree from each other. Very, very far. They're effectively not related. Yet, they look incredibly similar. They have very similar body shapes. They've adopted very similar means of surviving. They can curl up into little balls and protect themselves from attack. They've solved the survivability problem in very similar ways, and their solution has converged. Matter of fact, in biology, this is often referred to as convergent evolution, and these are convergent solutions in terms of problem solving. And these guys live in very, very similar environments. They eat very similar foods. They face very similar predators, and ultimately, they develop to the point that they're effectively indistinguishable from each other, at least to the lay observer, like you and me. Now, granted, there's some entomologist out there who can look at this and immediately tell you which one of these guys is which. I'm not one of them. But then again, who am I? I'm just a computer science teacher. But they converged very similar solutions. Let's talk about another example. I like this one. I like puppy dogs. This is an animal that you have definitely never seen, but you might have heard of. This is a kind of terrier called a turnspit terrier. Turnspit terriers were working animals. They were like horses and what are other working animals? Donkeys and things like that. Things that the animals who earn their living, so to speak. And what they did is they you can sort of see here a little hamster-looking wheel up in the corner with a little animal in it. Well, that animal is a turnspit terrier. He's sitting there and he's running in the turnspit. He is a motor. He is a biological motor. So these terriers were bred to be short and stocky and very, very strong. And the whole purpose of that was for them to get inside of little wheels like this and provide mechanical energy by running in the wheel. They were used for many different things. One of the things they were used for, which is where they get their name, is turning a turnspit, which is this little device right here, which is made to rotate things. And in this particular case, they're rotating meat on a fire, so they're roasting them. Now, these animals were so incredibly well adapted to the reason that we kept them around, and that was turning turnspits. They were really, really good at it. So good at it that they really didn't have a lot of other purpose. And this is where a problem comes in. The Industrial Revolution. We start getting coal and steam and things like this to make mechanical energy on our behalves. Well, when that became the case, well, the Turnspit Terrier was old tech. And people stopped buying them, and consequently, people stopped breeding them. And now the Turnspit Terrier is extinct. It doesn't exist anymore. It was so well adapted to this one avenue of survivability, helping out people who needed mechanical energy, that when its avenue for expressing that survivability trait disappeared, so did the animal. Let's look at a different example. You know, we're right now, I'm in the South. Most of the students watching this are in the southeastern U.S. We all probably know what this guy is. This is a cicada. Cicadas, for me, they're the sound of summer. I love the sound of cicada song. It's just very soothing to me. I love it. But these guys have taken an interesting approach to survivability, in that they're really bad at it. So how does that work? I mean, how does a species survive if members of the species are actually really bad at surviving? Well, let's take a look at these guys for a second. Anyone who's been around them knows that they don't hide. Matter of fact, they're giant green bugs. And they can fly, but they're really bad at it. Like, they fly around and they just bump into everything. And on top of that, they're screaming at you the whole time. And I haven't tried it personally, but I've heard, at least from the bird perspective, they're very tasty. Like, these are delicious, delicious creatures. And then, every few years, thousands and thousands and thousands of them just pop out of the ground, screaming, "Eat me, eat me, eat me." They're bad at surviving. And turns out, that's their species' approach to survivability. The reason, or one of the reasons rather, that these guys all come out of the ground en masse every few years is like, we're going to make so many of ourselves that you can eat as many of us as you want. We're going to advertise our presence. We're going to be big. We're going to be delicious. And there's going to be so many of us that there's no way you can eat all of us. And that's their species' approach to survivability, by being really, really bad at individual survival. So, one way to look at this is each of these examples of a species surviving is them trying to solve a solution under a certain set of constraints. So trying to solve the problem of surviving in a particular environment. And you can tell some things about the environment that they lived in based on the solutions that they found. So essentially they had to develop a survivability model for the environment they were trying to, survive in. And models are important. Models are based on heuristics and fitness functions and things that describe how behaviors exhibit themselves in a particular environment. And when we're trying to solve problems, we want to find a solution that best fits the behavior of the thing that we're trying to model. Not necessarily the data, because always remember, data is an echo of something else. And when we collect data from a particular problem or problem space or whatever we're trying to model, we're trying to understand the underlying functions that generated the data and not the data itself. And models are really important. We use them all over the place to get a better understanding of, things we're working with. I mean, like we use them in architecture to visualize buildings before we make them. And, and also to visualize things that are often larger than we can possibly look at. So if we make a tiny model of it, we can get a new perspective on the thing that we're modeling. We use it in automotive design to understand the aerodynamics of a car driving down the road before it's ever produced. We use it in education to teach us how to understand things that we might not be able to experience firsthand, like, say, molecular models or something along those lines. Even mathematics itself is a way of modeling things. Mathematics is a property, well, the thing that mathematics is describing is a property of reality itself. Our numerical expression of mathematics is a way of modeling that in a language. And even inside your own heads, you keep complicated models of your surroundings. As a matter of fact, several years back, the Nobel Prize in biology was awarded to the people who discovered these things. They're called grid cells. When you look out at the world around you, we get spatial cues from our vision, from our hearing, from the position of our joints, from tons of different signals. And we build up a spatial map of our surroundings that we can actually see represented in the neurology of our head. So that's kind of cool, right? And sometimes we use models even when we know they're wrong because it helps us think symbolically about a problem. For instance, there's a way of thinking about object recognition that's definitely not how the brain does it. And it's called geons. So think the idea that we can construct representations of objects in our surroundings out of other primitive geometric shapes, like this here. Like here are examples of geons. We have this U shape. We have a cylinder. We have a squarish like shape. And if we take one and put on the other, suddenly it's transformed from just being a cylinder and a U shape to being a coffee cup. Or if we take it and we put that U shape somewhere else, suddenly we have a suitcase or a briefcase or a purse or something along those lines. Now, this is definitely not how the brain encodes shapes, or not encodes shapes, but rather detects objects. But it is a way of modeling object recognition based off of a combination of more primitive geometric shapes and objects. And we're also really good at seeing faces. Like, we're great at it. Like, we can see, this face upside down and still recognize it's a face. But the problem is we're so fine-tuned to seeing faces in particular ways that we can sometimes deceive ourselves. Both of these images look fairly normal to both of, well, fairly normal. Both of them look fairly normal. We'll go with that. Until you flip them right side up. And what we're doing is we're actually seeing individual features within the face that were turned right side up from the view that we were looking, or right side up relative to the whole face. And they just look natural. But when we put them oriented both right ways up, the facial features that were upside down suddenly look terrible, horrible, and grotesque. And, like we even have models of how the world operates and the motions that we're seeing. Like right here. This is an animation. Some of you know the TV show it comes from. And here's what here's what you're seeing. Or I'd usually ask you guys when we're in person what you're seeing. And you'd say, oh, well, this dude's driving down the street. Then I'd be like, well, is he? Or is this a case where his car has stopped working and it's rolling backwards down a hill? Because that's what you're seeing. Now tell me, which way is he going? And oh my gosh, it looks like he's rolling down the hill now. Except, that was a lie. Turns out he actually is driving down the street. Now, from your perspective, it looks like he's driving down the street again. And keep in mind, I'm not changing the video. It's just there's so few frames of animation here that you really can't distinguish whether or not he's going forward or rolling backward. Truth is, he's probably actually moving forward down the street. And I didn't change the image any of those times. But chances are, a good bit of you, when I said, oh, he's actually rolling down the street, you saw the direction of motion reverse. And that's because there's too little information here. And you have a model in your head of how the world works. That in the absence of information, you fill in the gaps, you fill in the details. In this case, when there wasn't enough visual information to say whether or not he was rolling backwards, the little nudge in perception saying, oh, he's rolling forwards, oh, he's rolling backwards, was enough to change the model inside your head of what you were seeing. Kind of cool, right? So we often talk about mathematical models in terms of their degree, and you can think back to our notes on polynomial models about this. So, for instance, if we try to find a solution to describe this data here, you know, some set of the x and y values. So if we come up with a 0-degree model, remember that is going to be like a horizontal line just running through the middle of our data. And as we increase the degree of our model, we get closer and closer to describing the patterns that we have in that model. So 1 degree gets us a little bit closer, 2 degrees gets us a nice curve approximating our model. 3 degrees, we're pretty dead on with the patterns that we're seeing. However, you know, seems to be working pretty well. Let's just bump it up to like 1,000 degrees or something like that, you know? Let's just something more conservative. Let's say 40 degrees. Well, we might get a model out of this that actually looks like this. Well, it's actually pretty good at predicting individual points. Now this is, you know, a hyperbolic exaggeration, an example for the purposes of you know, explaining fitting of models. What we can see is that, you know, individual points actually come really, really close to this line. But it doesn't look like it describes the overall pattern that we're seeing. Well, it could be that we just don't have enough data. Maybe this is what's happening. So let's collect some more data and see what we get. Well, we see that our model starts diverging as we add new data that our model hasn't seen before, that our model hasn't been developed to fit. And this brings us to the trade-off between variability and bias. So overfitting a model, you end up making a model that describes your training data really, really well, but is not generalizable and doesn't well describe any new data that you test the model against. Similarly, we can underfit a model. We can train it so little that, yeah, it gives us very consistent results, but it's very consistently wrong. And again, also doesn't well describe the system that we're trying to model. So just always remember this. When you're collecting data that describes some underlying function. And when you create a model of that data, you want your model not to describe the data itself, but the thing the data was describing, the functions that underlie the data itself. Our overfit model has very low bias and high variability, while it's the other way around for our underfit model. We have very high bias and low variability. And what we want to do when we're creating a good model is try to find a trade-off in between. And so we don't want to train our models to the point that it only works on the data that we trained it on. So when training a model, you want to actually hold some of your data back. And so you want to have a set of data that you train your model on. And then you want to hold back segments of your data that you want to use for testing. And this is often called the 1/3 rule. You keep 2/3 of your data for training and 1/3 of your data for testing. And so this way, after you've trained your model, you've got data that the model hasn't seen before. And you can test it against that to see if it well describes it. So if your model works well both on the data it has seen and the data it hasn't seen, then you probably have a fairly robust model. So what you want to do is avoid making models that only work on the data you trained it on and nothing else. Because then you have an overfit solution, kind of like that Turnspit Terrier. It had a survivability solution that worked as long as people needed dogs running inside of wheels. And as soon as that environment changed, the solution was no longer general. The solution could not be generalized, and the solution, the Turnspit Terrier, didn't survive along with it. So what you want is something that's sort of like the pill bug of solutions. something that is going to survive under a wide variety of conditions, that's going to work really well for whatever circumstance that you're trying to train your model to operate under. Okay, folks, so we're going to wrap up our discussion here. I hope you're all doing well, staying happy, healthy, and safe. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with me, get in touch with the class TA. We're here to help.